Hello. Hello? Hello?
Hi there.
Hi, how are you doing?
Not bad. You?
I am fantastic. Let me start sharing my screen and may I ask if you're okay with me recording this session, and if not I will not record.
No, that should be all right.
Fantastic, because I'm thinking to put it on my tiny nobody YouTube channel for the in case there's somebody who maybe can't make it but would like to. Just give me a second to share my screen to the relevant bit. So, yes, how are you doing? Your day's going well, I hope.
Yeah, well, it hasn't been too long, so I mean, I woke up about 3 hours ago, so the coffee's still coursing through my veins.
Oh, fantastic. That's the best time to learn, really. So when the coffee is coursing through your veins. Okay, so this is reading medieval English literature, just a sort of test run of what the module might be like for me. And we're going to start with like the very earliest bits of Old English literature. So I just thought I would do a bit of an icebreaker by asking, I guess, what Old English literature means to you. What do you think of when you think of medieval or Old English literature? How much do you know already? What have you read? This kind of stuff.
So, perhaps it's just your luck. I've actually am fairly familiar with it. I have a master's degree in medieval studies myself.
Same.
Although I haven't, yeah, I haven't continued into academia like you have. I decided I didn't want to go on to do a PhD after I did my MA. I focused more on sort of later Middle English literature, but I can read Old English. I did some work on it, and actually presented a paper on it on the rune poem when I was in my post-grad program. Unpublished still, but
That's very exciting.
yeah.
Nice. Okay, so you're a really good candidate for this. I do have to confess I'm better at Middle English than Old English, but I think everyone would be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, so we probably won't actually have to do too much.
Whoever the other fellow is, you're very quiet.
Oh, there's somebody else in the chat. Brilliant. Hello.
Hello.
Um, quick disclaimer to whoever the new person is. Also, welcome. We're recording this session. If you don't want to be recorded, just like say so, and I'll turn the recording off.
Okay.
So, you okay with being recorded, or?
Yeah. By the way, I'm Adwin. I am the owner of the server. Hello.
Wait, it's not Drang?
It's Drang. I also call myself Adwina. That's what my name says in runes.
Oh, sorry, because I can't actually see the my thing is full screen. I can't actually see the Discord right now. Hey.
Hello. So yes, I'm Drang. But yeah, my name in runes is I don't know the name to it, but it spells out Adwina.
Uh-huh. What is so
Bellatrix.
we've been doing like introductions. So what's your like background with Old English, Middle English, this kind of stuff?
Well, I'm completely outclassed by you guys because y'all have actually studied this stuff. I'm a complete amateur. I just got into Old English because it's kind of just interesting to me, kind of a heritage thing. And it's just cool language. So I'm a complete amateur, no academic background. I'm at university studying forensic science actually, so definitely not an English major.
It's quite a fun degree though, because I did a little bit for my undergrad of forensic science. It's exciting to be sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I've learned it for a couple of years, and for online Neo-Old English standards, I'm pretty good at it, but I'm I don't read as much of the literature as maybe someone who's actually studied it properly would have. So I'm kind of a bit of a noob on the reading, but hey, I
Well,
am to participate.
I mean, here's the thing, like, full disclosure, I'm basically a noob as well, because I've not had any formal education in Old English. My bachelor's was in anthropology and archaeology, and my master's was medieval studies, but it didn't have any Old English as part of the education. I've gotten a tiny bit when I've started my PhD in Old English, but not very much, so I'm sort of coming at it as a noob as well.
Yeah, I've the last time I've taken a proper English class and had to read any real literature was back in high school, and you know, we read part of the Canterbury Tales, obviously in translation. You know, I was crazy for even looking up the original spellings and reading off that.
Yeah, oh no, it was exactly the same for my masters, and I was like, how are we meant to be analysing poetry in translation? It's the worst. Like,
I, I just looked it up because at that point I was already kind of interested in early English, just because of literal autism. Anyway, um, so I so I basically never read the translation of the Canterbury Tales. When it came time to make my little presentation on my part, I just kind of updated the spellings of the original and hoped no one would notice.
and did they notice?
I don't know. I think my teacher might have noticed that my wording was different. I don't know if she noticed why my wording was different.
Right.
We never
Oh
had to
goodness.
memorize, we never had to memorize the original pronunciation. I did though, a little
I mean,
bit.
it's fun. It's beautiful stuff.
One that up there with his surest sort, the drought of March has person to the road, and bothered every veins which the tour of which where two engendered is the floor.
Yeah, lovely, absolutely gorgeous stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last icebreaker before we go in. What are your guys' favourite Old English? What's your one favourite Old English work, poem, whatever?
Um, I'm gonna say, because I haven't read very many of them, I'm gonna say the one that I've actually read some of, which is gonna be I think it's called either. Oh God, I don't know what it's called. Give me a moment. Um,
What's it about? I'll probably remember what it is.
Hang on. Is it the Seafarer? I think that's the one.
Okay, that's the one that we're going to be covering next week, actually. So that's
I'm just
a good
I'm just
shout.
checking. I'm just checking to make sure it's the right one. Um, Seafarer.
And what about you, other person whose name I'm forgetting now, Mayor Maxima Culpa?
No worries. Oh, my real name, incidentally, is, and you'll like this because it is also medieval, is Percy. Um, yeah,
Nice.
not a very common name, I know. But or you can just call me Heorte, if you want. Most people
Yeah,
do
I was
here.
not thinking of the Seafarer. I was thinking of the Wanderer.
Heralta. Well, okay, we could do the Wanderer as well. Yes. So Heralta, what's your favourite Old English poem?
Hard to narrow it down. But I mean, I worked with. I mean, I'm actually, I would say overall, have become more interested in Old English prose. Um, but in terms of poetry, I'd say it's a toss-up between um, the rune poem, because of course I did write a paper on that, but also the Nine Herbs charm.
Hmm. Those are two very good choices. I respect those choices, especially the Nine Herbs charm, because don't we have one of the only references in Old English to Woden in that poem, which is
Right.
quite
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
I like the very sort of mysterious. I mean, the image. There's sort of just these references to things, and you don't entirely know what they mean, like the glory twigs striking the serpent. I mean, there's ideas I know, but and I think there are some analogs in the Norse corpus, but I'm not. I don't. A lot of it is just very mysterious. I think at the end there's something about the speaker says something about like only I know where the river is or something like that, and yeah. Anyway,
So very valid choice. my favorite one is definitely Christ and Satan, because as a metalhead, it's so metal, you can't avoid it. So I love that. Okay, so given that you guys have like a fair bit of like understanding, amateur or otherwise, about the history, I'll just sort of brush through this like original like presentation that I'd included in these PowerPoints for somebody who may not be completely familiar with Old English, and then we can like start the actual discussion topics, which are quite exciting. So the English language is spoken from around 450 Common Era in Britain. In 410 Common Era, the Emperor Honorius of Rome issued the Rescript, which recalled Roman soldiers from Britain, and that left the native Romano-British vulnerable. And the Venerable Bede, and I believe Gildas as well, describe how the Romano-British chieftains initially hired Anglo-Saxon mercenaries to defend themselves from the Picts in the north, but then eventually these Anglo-Saxons just took over and started ruling England in their own right. And archaeologically we can know that this happened in migration waves from around 450 Common Era, and these people spread their language across the whole of what is now England and drove the ancestors of the modern day Welsh and the Cornish into Wales and Cornwall. Now, modern DNA evidence is contesting the extent to which it was a replacement or merely a linguistic replacement. So we're going to find the evidence in future decades as to whether the Romano-British were killed in large numbers and replaced, or whether the Anglo-Saxons rather intermarried into the Romano-British population. But nonetheless, as we have it by Venerable Bede, certainly the language was displaced, which existed there before, and the Romano Britons would have spoken a mixture of sort of older Welsh and then also like vulgar Latin, basically, until around the 7th century. So the earliest bit of Old English we have is the famous Castor by Norwich astragalus, which is a row bone which is used as a sort of throwing die from the for games of knucklebones and such lot, and it's from the 5th century Common Era, and it says in runes on it Raihan or Rohan, Raihan, Raihin, meaning roe deer. So this is possibly the oldest English word that we have attested. Very exciting stuff. Here is another artifact which I quite like to bring up as an example to students, because it really exemplifies, I think, what Anglo-Saxon or Old English culture was like. And because we have in this one picture, we have a fusion of all sorts of Germanic and Greco-Roman and even Christian cultural influences. So we can see that on the left side of this image we have the names Titus, and then I believe Titus, and then it tells something, I think it's in Latin, about the siege of Marsala, in which of course the Jewish people were sort of subjugated. And that's the bit on the left horizontal side is written in Latin, but then on the vertical plane we have bits of writing in actual Old English and in runes, and then on the right hand side we have bits of Latin script which is written in Latin as well. So we have runes being used to write Latin and to write Old English, and we have the Latin script standing on its own as well, and we have these images of these images and concepts from pagan art, so the sort of biting animals and interweaving vines, which are incorporated into the artwork of the Frank's casket. And it's a really good visual representation of the fusion of quote-unquote pagan pre-Christian culture and a sort of Latin and Christian culture which would characterize Old English literature. And here is one of my favourite bits of Old English poetry, because it's one of these rare times where the archaeology and history completely intersect. So we have on the right hand side of the screen transcriptions from the Rotherwell Cross, and you can see a plaster cast of it at the Victoria and Albert Museum to this day. It's a really beautiful cast, and it's a cross that was erected in the 7th century, and it contains in runes a poem called The Dream of the Rue, written in Old English. And we find this exact same poem in a manuscript in later centuries, I believe a manuscript from the 11th century called the Vercelli book. So It's one of these rare instances where we have something in a manuscript and then we find it out there in the real world. And not just that, but we find it in a much earlier century, showing that this poem has sort of persisted in Old English traditions across many centuries. So it must have been of quite great significance. And the Rotherham Cross, a bit like the Frank's Casket, has a mixture of runes and of Old English and of Latin language on it. So it's quite a beautiful example of the culture that gets created when England is Christianized, which brings us to St. Augustine's mission, which was to convert Kent in 495 Common Era. He was sent by Pope Gregory the Great, who, walking through an English slave market, is reported to have remarked that it's a shame that the English, whose name sounds like angels, should be pagan and not Christian. So he sent Augustine to convert the Cantabrians to Christianity. And it was this mission which brought books and biblical scholarship for the first time since its conquest by pagans. And this book is one of the books that they brought with them, almost certainly. It's the Gospels of St. Augustine. And it's one of the few also illuminated biblical manuscripts to survive from the 6th century. It was produced in Italy and then brought over to England. Really lovely stuff, and it's got a beautiful unsealed script for the main body of its writing as well. You can have a look at the full digitization of this manuscript at the Parker Library on the web online for free. So now we come to the discussion topic for today, which are our 2 Old English poems, some of the very earliest ones. The story behind Caedmon's hymn being that, who knows the story of Caedmon's hymn? Who's familiar with it?
We did learn it. I don't know if I entirely remember.
Well, that's entirely fine. It's a good entryway to like.
I think wasn't it that he's I forget exactly. I think it's supposed to be like an angel or something comes to him. I forget how, because he can't sing, but then or like he says, I don't know how to sing, and then the angel gets him to sing anyway, and miraculously he has a beautiful singing voice or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think the story was like Caedmon was some cow herder, and he was like at some like gathering, and they were all singing poetry, and he's like, I don't know any poetry. He went home for the night, an angel revealed himself to Caedmon and taught him how to write poetry about God and stuff, and he's just kept writing all these poems, except we only have the one left. This one. Exactly,
and you've done the intro for me, and this poem is recorded in Bede's manuscript of the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, and we have here 2 versions, a Northumbrian version and a West Saxon version. And who can sort of describe to me the difference, I suppose, between these two? Some sort of phonological differences, some orthographic differences.
Well, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with Northumbrian, but just looking at it, I assume they were using the letter U or 2 U's to represent the W sound, whereas, I mean, obviously in the West Saxon, our letter W is standing in for win.
Yes.
And then the other thing I notice is the Northumbrian is using TH, which I assume they just took from Latin usage, and then obviously the West Saxons using a thorn and an ed.
Yes, exactly, yes.
So I've noticed, alongside what Helen saw, the Northumbrian version, we have a lot of I's and H's in the unstressed vowels, where West Saxon has E's. So we have in the Northumbrian Metudas, and in the West Saxon Meltodes.
Mm-hmm.
And the word Modyathung is written Modgidung in the Northumbrian.
Yes, it's a difficult one to say because I'm forgetting who said it, but you're right in that the Northumbrian version is quite clearly sort of writing Old English using Latin orthography, But the issue is that a lot of vulgar Latin orthography from the same time period makes some of the same distinctions that are happening here. So you pointed out that it's metudas in the Northumbrian version and meotodes in the West Saxon version. So you can see that the U in Northumbrian gets converted to an O in the West Saxon. But that's actually something that happens quite a lot in Vulgar Latin, and also the AE becoming a simple E. That's also something that's very common in Vulgar Latin. So it could be, if we're assuming a scribe... Sorry, go on.
In the Northumbrian, we've got both Ash letters, the AE ligature, and then AE as two separate letters, like 2 words in a row. We've got metudas with an Ash, and then Macti with a AE, which
Yes, and actually, I believe, I'm not certain, but I believe in the script where this is written, they would have been quite visibly distinct letters, so there might be a good reason why they're doing this. And / or it's possible that the AE is just, sorry, the Ash rather, is just meant to be standing for the sound of a simple E. We sort of can't tell, especially in these early days of like Latin script. And actually, I'll show you a picture, although it's not...
Okay.
Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, can you go back?
Oh yes, of course.
Have word forms, please. I was gonna say, knowing Old English grammar a bit, I've noticed they spell the same ending with AE and Ash in hevan riches. Oh, it's weird saying it that way. And the AES and the ASH-S are the same ending. They're the genitive singular, and they're spelled 2 different ways, which I wonder what that means.
Ah, you're so heaven.
It suggests to me that the former is maybe more archaic. That it's closer to what the endings might have been in Proto-Germanic or whatever preceded Old English.
I'll be honest. I'm not a philologist really. I don't know what's in Proto-Germanic. I don't think that's the case. I mean, because I'm studying Gothic, and I know that in Gothic, which is a bit older than Old English, the genitives are sort of single vowel and an S. Usually it's an I and an S. So I don't think that's what it is. My interpretation is that the AE and the Ash are they are equivalent in the Northumbrian version, and they're sort of, either they're standing in for the same sound, or the scribe is writing them as the same letter, basically.
Actually, what I can't explain the genitive singular. True enough. I'm actually looking at dative singulars with just "a" as the ending. That suggests to me, because I believe, but I could be wrong here, the Proto-Germanic is "I."
Yes, I think it is. Yes, it is in Gothic at least.
Maybe I'm missing something. Where are you seeing an "a" in the dative?
Tiade, firum foldu.
Where is it?
Yes, after tiade firum foldum.
There it is.
Oh, so no, if I'm correct, teode is showed. It's a verb. It's not a dative.
Yeah, I was
Oh, right, the verb teon. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm. It's still the morning where I am, so my brain isn't completely on yet.
It's entirely fine. Something you guys have pointed out about the Northumbrian version, and it's worth noting its inverse in the West Saxon version, is that the West Saxon is consistent in its spelling. We have hefein rikais up in the Northumbrian version, and then metu das with an ash in the next word over, whereas in the Northumbrian version they spell it quite consistently with just an E. They don't mix up a diphthong and the ash. And there's various other ways in which the spelling... Oh, here's another one as well. So the W is represented in the Northumbrian version sometimes with a single U and sometimes with a double U, if you'll forgive the pun. And in the West Saxon version, it's a simple win that's representing it every single time. Um,
I'm pretty sure that's not a W. I'm pretty sure that's a single U representing W followed by a U representing U, I think.
which one is it? Sorry.
In Wundra, you said you're pointing that as an example of a W standing for a W. It sounds so weird saying a
Oh, sorry.
W
Yes,
standing
that.
for
Yes, no, that is That's a
it's
very good point.
but that word Wundra has a W and so does Wundur
No,
follow.
no, yeah, you're right. I'm entirely wrong.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah, no,
just look.
so
I can see a single example of an actual double U for a double. God, why can't we have a better word for it than a W?
we can call it doubled U, but that feels just awkward.
It's called the modern letter Wun and Bede.
Yeah, okay. No, but you're right. I mean, I have seen this in Old English before, a doubled U, but I've not. But it's not here. It's not here.
I've heard of using two U's for a W, but there's no examples of that in this text, I don't think.
Yeah. In this third line here, we have Aldebaran hemen til hrofa, and then in the West Saxon we have heofon to hrofa. The B and the B and the V distinction is one that actually is quite common in Vulgar Latin at the time. They would pronounce their V's as B's, and Old English in the West Saxon version often sort of renders a V as an F in terms of its writing. So this sound might have, the B sound rather, at least in certain contexts in the Northumbrian version, might have been pronounced as an F or a B sound. It's hard to say, and this isn't my area of expertise, but I guess the main points to bring away from looking at this are, like you pointed out, the Northumbrian version is less consistent, so clearly, well, I guess, what does it say, actually, if the Northumbrian version is less consistent in how it's spelled?
My interpretation of that would be that the West Saxon dialect is what became kind of the de facto standard of writing Old English in the Old English days, and so maybe the West Saxon dialect, they put more effort into making this more consistent, and back then they were just kind of writing it however they saw fit, because you notice a bunch of things that can't possibly be spelled how they're actually said, because it makes no sense for later Old English. If you look at like cognate words, like the word drichten in the Northumbrian is spelled druktin.
Yes.
Which is very weird and makes me think that this was just transferring over like vulgar Latin spellings, because they didn't have an H sound by that point. So they just used the closest sound. And
yes, I find it interesting that they didn't use CH. They could have done, but didn't.
Yeah, it makes it weird for me then that they kind of brought back the H later on. I don't know what's going on there, but
Aesthetic.
yeah, you see a lot of spellings where it looks like they've just taken the closest Latin equivalent, like mogadonk and drichtin and almechtig instead of almechtig. It's very weird.
Yes, certainly. And if, like you say, they are making English spelling more standard in the West Saxon context, I mean, I think this means that it's only possible, rather, when you have some degree of centralized political control over a larger region, right? In order to implement a reform that's going to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, and that reform, quite famously, is King Alfred's educational reform. But I have a question for you guys, and it's a question that I was asked early on, and I don't actually know the answer, which is Caedmon's hymn a translation from a Latin poem, rather than this Latin that we have here being a translation of the English poem? Do any of you know Latin by any chance?
I have some background in it, but I haven't used it for a long time.
Yeah, I'm very beginner at Latin. I've done a few chapters of Lingua Latina per se illustrata, but I'm not very good at it.
But that's
it looks like the first bit of this says, we must now praise the creator of the kingdom of heaven. So that sounds pretty, I mean, it seems similar, but I could not tell you which came first.
Yeah, so that it's just an interesting question that I don't. My guess of it is that the English is original, but the problem we have, and that's what I've written on the screen here, is that we only have the Old English text written in the marginalia of Bede's Ecclesiastical History, which is a Latin text. I believe, I'm not certain, but I believe that a text of Caedmon's hymn is incorporated, the West Saxon text is incorporated into the Tanner Bede Old English translation of Bede's Ecclesiastical History. So at some point the Old English version gets incorporated into the main text. It's no longer marginalia, but this is a really interesting case to bring in how the borderline between margin or a commentary and the actual text itself is not always entirely clear in the Middle Ages. So it's possible, and we can't sort of, I think, disprove it one way or the other. It's possible that this Northumbrian version, which is the earliest version we have of in Old English of Caedmon's hymn, it's possible that the Northumbrian version is an English translation of Bede's Latin verse that we've got here, explaining in Old English what the lyrics are, and this in subsequent copies of Bede's Ecclesiastical History, which was a very popular book in early medieval England, they would copy the Old English footnote in addition to the Latin text of the thing. And then after a while, people may have forgotten that the Old English was actually an addition. They might have thought that it was something that Bede originally wrote, and therefore they move it out of the margins into the main body of the text. So it's frankly an open question. There's a future paper in it somewhere for somebody who's very eager to go through it. Now it's harder to.
Caedmon's hymn, it's a poem, and it's been done in a proper Old English style. Usually, Old English translations of Latin are very stiff and very faithful to Latin.
Mm.
If you a lot of beginners will have to go through some parts of Elfric's colloquy, or however you pronounce that word.
Yes.
It's actually a pretty terrible way to learn Old English, because it's been very literally painfully translated out of Latin. So I get this feeling that maybe it's just because that was a literal gloss of Latin thing, just meant to help the teacher with the students and all that, but I've always gotten this feeling that translations from Latin were never made idiomatic. Maybe this is different because it's a poem.
Yeah, so Robert Stanton in 2011 has a really good book on the culture of translation in Anglo-Saxon England, and he talks about how there's a continuum basically between glosses, interlinear glosses, and marginalia or commentaries like we have here. So this bit of Caedmon's hymn at the bottom of the screen is marginalia, right? So it's written at the bottom of a text. Sometimes you will get Old English texts such as the earliest West Saxon, I believe, translation of the Bibles, which are actually in the form of interlinear glosses between lines of Latin. Now, as you say, sometimes with these glosses, they're more literal than others. Sometimes these glosses are literally sort of grammatical sentences in between the lines of Latin text, but sometimes they're just like a literal word for word translation. So above the Latin word for fish, they'll have the English word for fish, and then they'll have the verb, even if in Old English the verb wouldn't go there, something like this. And there's sort of a spectrum between these three things, of like the least literal being a sort of verbatim interlinear gloss, moving up to a sort of more free-flowing interlinear gloss, and then commentaries which are possibly composed in the original language, etc. And based on these features, I think that this Northumbrian version of Caedmon's hymn, like you say, it's just too poetic, I think, to realistically be a translation of that, well, actually, no. I was going to say that, but we do have to remember, actually, to be entirely fair, that we have Old English poetry that's really beautiful in its composition, but which is, we know, is still a translation. It might.
Just
Sorry, yeah.
if like, are we assuming that like that Bede, sorry, translated it from Latin and just like made up the Caedmon story?
So the authorship, yeah, it it's not clear whether Bede himself actually wrote this bit of Old English at the bottom of the screen. We know for a fact that he wrote the Latin, and he says that the Latin is an interpretation of the meaning of Caedmon's hymn. And it does sort of get the meaning across in a less artful way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I realize, and I guess I can't do it because I'm not experienced enough with Latin verse, would be to scan the Latin and see what kind of meter it has.
Yeah, if I were to try and read it, my Latin pronunciation is not amazing. I'm not great with my vowel length, which is of course what you need for poetry. But I think it's something like Lung laudare debemus actorem reini celestis, potentiam creatoris et consilium milios, facta patris gloriae quomodo ille, cum sit aeternos Deus omnium miraculorum autra existit, qui primo filiis omnium caelum procumine tecti, de in terram custos humani generis omnipotens creavit.
Yeah,
sorry,
sounds
omnipotens
good.
creavit, yeah. I'm not good at my Latin, so that might have been completely butchered.
No. That sounds pretty good.
Sounded all right once I realized you're doing the Italian pronunciation.
Oh, yes.
I'm very used to classical pronunciation. I would never say cielo. I would always say cielo.
Mea maxima culpa. Oh my god, we had him in the Gothic server. We had a guy come in, and he'd heard that I could like speak Latin conversationally, and he asked me like, "Yo, what's up?" in Latin, and he kept asking me to like chat, and I was like, "Okay, fine, I'll chat." But he kept making these rude comments like, "I don't understand your accent. What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "Dude."
Debemos autorem regni caelestis.
Yes.
Et concilium.
Oops, sorry.
It's fine. I can't speak Latin.
But yeah,
I was actually alluding more to like the the meter
mm,
and like how is this? I mean, I don't know. I mean, the usual medieval Latin meter is leonine hexameter, which is like a total medieval invention. I don't think that's here, but I could be wrong. I mean, if this is a really sort of shaky translation, I would imagine, the meter doesn't quite work. And
I'd like to send this to like someone who actually knows their stuff about Latin poetry and see if this scans in any sort of way. That would
yeah.
give us.
Well, I mean, so leonine verse, according to like literally me googling it because it's not my area of expertise, is a little bit, seems to be a bit later on than this. And Bede was able to compose, I believe, in hexameter Latin verse. He was a very competent Latinist and Hellenicist actually, so I'm sure he can write.
Greek.
Oh yeah, Bede. Oh goodness, I'm forgetting her name. But the woman who did a survey of the Greek language in Anglo-Saxon manuscripts says that Bede was probably one of the last competent Greek scholars, aside from obviously like Theodore of Tarsus or whatever, in early medieval England. Yeah. We know that because he reads and incorporates some Greek scientific sources into his educational works.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, I've wondered because I came across one of the things that really interests me, or has interested me in the past, is how like Anglo-Saxons were coming across some of these terms for these very abstract things, like syllogism. I mean, there is an Old English word for that. And like, how they knew that, because when I did medieval history, we basically learned that there's a few Irish scholars that have some Greek, but really Greek is gone from the West. And really, I mean, the Aristotelian corpus comes back in the end of the 13th century, but like actual like widespread study of Greek doesn't really take root until the second half of the 15th century in Italy.
Yes. This is true. I mean, like you'll know, we do have some Greek words surviving in Hiberno-Latin dictionaries. They'll preserve a lot of Greek or just neologisms. But as for where Bede sourced his Greek materials, I suppose we can't really know. I mean, obviously, it's going to be Montgomery Jarrow, but where they got it from is harder to say. I mean, we have to remember, to be slightly fair, that Montgomery Jarrow was a very wealthy, well-connected monastery, so it's not unreasonable, I think, that they could have gotten some Greek. Especially given that Canterbury, I believe, in the future would have a Greek-speaking bishop come in, Theodore of Tarsus. So I don't think it's impossible that they could have studies of Greek there, but yes, it certainly would have been quite limited, if there was any at all. And yeah, to I suppose round up, there's a couple of features in how the Old English gets across meaning. Like you said, it doesn't sort of do meter based on syllable length like Latin does. It sort of has a rhythmic beat, a more rhythmic meter based on beats. I will try and read out the West Saxon version, and forgive my pronunciation, I'm not that great with Old English, but if you listen out, you have sort of 4 beats roughly, like a big beats. So it's like nu Shulon Herri and Herfon reaches word, Merter is Merter on his Moriathank, Werak Wildor Father, Swa he wundre was, Eche Drichten, or on Stelde. He aris sheop Erthan, Bernum helfen to Hrofe, Halli Shippend, Va midden jerd Monkines word, Eche Drichten, after Theode Firum Voldan, Freya Almichti. You can hear in that how there's like sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 beat that comes in. Another interesting feature of the Old English poetry is these sort of double words. There's a term for it that I'm now forgetting. Maybe one of you'll remember, but like Werak Wildor Father, Etchid Richten, Oron Stelde. And sometimes in translations of Latin poetry, they just make up synonyms of the same word so that they can translate the same thing twice, in order to have that rhythmic effect. It's something that seems very comfortable to Old English poets, is that double word couplet thing at the end of clauses. It's quite cool. Let's have a brief look also at a hymn supposedly written by Bede himself on his deathbed, and I think it's really metal, this one, really. Does anyone know what this means in Old English?
Looks like... Ooh. Oh yeah, this is I'd need to see a dictionary for some of the stuff. I mean, I recognize some of the words, but yeah, like for that's like before or also in front of, if memory serves.
Yes.
And then before the need, I don't know what Ned. I don't know what Ned Feta is. Like a companion in need. I don't know.
No, so I believe it's what's the word? Ned from sort of nether and sort of fair in terms of going. So it's like a down farer.
The descent or descendant. Someone going down.
A descender, yeah.
So the last bit of it, the last bit of it says something like, the part that starts "Whet his gasta godis of Ivlas." It's kind of saying that you'll be judged whether you were good or bad after your death, I think.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, so I'll just go through the...
I don't know what... Is Esther a mistake?
Yes, I believe so. It's after.
Yeah. I just noticed this one says Esther, and I was like, that can't be right.
It's because in the script...
That definitely makes it a lot easier, because it It's like questesgaste godeso ivlas efter dette dömed with. This is some form of Indian, isn't it? So yeah, it just says his spiritual will be judged his day of death. He was good or bad.
Yes. So I'll read out the Hague version because it's the most consistent. And it's like, Vorder them nedfere, nani weir the thonksnottera, don him there see it or imhidgena, ar his hinjonge, whet his gaste godes, or the ifles after death day a delmeth weirthe. And I've butchered the pronunciation because it's all over the place. But basically it means for the descender, the opinions of the wise and the learned mean nothing when he needs to consider before his departure what will be whether his soul will be judged good or bad after Doomsday. Or Doomsday, sorry. So it's a very, and I think there's something really poetic in Bede, this like foremost scholar of his age, renowned scholar of his age, saying that, now as I'm dying, all of these scholarly opinions, which really mattered to Bede, he wrote many sort of angry letters defending his positions. He was involved in academia of his day, and then he says sort of, when you're dying, all of these scholarly opinions mean nothing to you. What are you sort of thinking about is whether your soul is going to be damned or saved. It's quite dramatic.
Yeah, no, I just noticed another weird misspelling in the Hague version. I looked at that one because it looked kind of more normal to me because it's kind of in the later version of spelling. But I noticed that Funksnotura has somehow turned into Thonusnotura, and I'm wondering where that error got introduced.
It's probably O, the O got sort of the scribe maybe made the C a little too round, and or I don't know, is this like a program that scans text and tries to convert it? I don't know.
It's not a program. So these texts are all my Old English poetry I'm taking from the corpus of Anglo-Saxon poetry.
Okay.
So these transcriptions were made by scholars, but they were made by scholars maybe 50 years ago, so they could be quite outdated. And for many of these, we can't look at the original, unfortunately.
Yeah, the Hague version of it looks full of kind of misread letters. Like we've got CF and Rie, and it looks very weird and doesn't look like what it should look like. I know that's a bad way to describe it, but
no, it's valid.
No, I've actually tried to read the two. The Northumbrian version is more readable because the words are correct.
Yes. And in the Northumbrian version, we can see the double U.
I don't want to say correct the scholars, but maybe put some notes that these might be misspelled and put what they should be.
Yes.
Or did they? If they are misspelled, though, they may not have wanted to amend anything.
Yeah.
I know there are some people that they don't want emendations.
That's what I'm saying. You should make notes of misspellings, but put in parentheses what the words are supposed to be.
Yes, this is what in a critical edition of a text would be done by a critical apparatus. So you'd have footnotes saying that in the manuscript you had so and so, which I would prefer personally, but we don't have that here, unfortunately. So yeah, I think this is a good point to draw to a conclusion our course. We've now looked at two of some of the earliest contesters for Old English poetry, and you guys already know this because you've done this, but some things to bear in mind: that Old English literary culture is a sort of fusion of Germanic oral poetic traditions with Latin literary customs and manuscript culture. Almost all Old English texts that we have are translations of Latin originals. One of you guys can maybe tell me if I've missed something out, but I think the exceptions are Old English texts which are known not to be, or are not contested to be, translations like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Beowulf, Dream of the Rood, maybe like the Nine Herbs Charm, and like a couple of others. But there's about 5 to 10 which are not translations of originals. Have I missed any big ones?
I don't know. You probably know that better than I do.
Yeah, maybe.
Are we guessing? Are we saying that like most of the poems are probably not except like Caedmon's hymn, because we just discussed that one probably being a translation. But like, are we thinking that like the Seafarer is a translation? That was original.
So the poetry is obviously less likely to be a translation, but a lot of them, yeah. I mean, the biblical poetry certainly, which people used to think was composed by Caedmon, but recent analysis have shown is made by multiple authors. The biblical poetry is certainly all translations, obviously. There is an Old English translation of Physiologius, which is in verse form. Like the Phoenix, for instance, is taken from Physiologius. The Wanderer and the Seafarer, Battle of Malden. Battle of Malden is another one which probably isn't a translation. It's probably original. But that's sort of part of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, isn't it? So quite few, like, yeah, the Wanderer and Seafarer may not be, but it's hard to say. The riddles may not be as well, but there is also a Latin tradition of riddles, so it could well be translated from a Latin original. It's hard to say. Like, in my opinion, part of the reason it's hard to say is because when you look at, like, if you look at the biblical poetry as an example, the Old English Genesis and all this are so well written, they're so, like, poetic in Old English that you wouldn't necessarily guess that they were translated from. They don't feel, in my opinion, like slavish translations of Latin, even though you know that they must be, or at least adapting stuff from Latin. So another point to bear in mind is that manuscripts were very expensive to produce, and that English is sort of considered an inferior language to Latin until the 10th century with King Alfred's educational reforms, and until then it didn't have any written standard. And when King Alfred sort of establishes the West Saxon kingdom across all of England, you have the West Saxon dialect, which becomes the standard for spelling Old English. And as you two will also know, Old English is a highly inflected language, and it communicates meaning in a manner quite different to modern or Middle English. So this is I think a good point around. And do you guys have any like final thoughts or points you wanted to bring up?
Really? Yeah.
Cool. For next week, what I was thinking of, because on the course syllabus that I've gotten, they've got like Exeter book poetry basically, and given that you said that you had done your done an essay or done a lot of reading on the Seafarer, and I haven't actually read that, I was thinking, should we have a look at the Seafarer and maybe attempt a translation of a couple of lines of it? Sorry?
Sure, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, that will be great. Thank you guys so much for joining this test run. If you have any feedback on it, please like let me know in like DMs or whatever. It's like what I can do better. I'll upload this to my YouTube channel, but it will be like unlisted, so it won't be massively public. But so you guys can like watch it and have as a resource for yourself. So yes.
Hear how terrible we sound.
Oh no, trust me, I really hate how I sound. Yeah, I've worked on my voice for ages and I still really hate it. It's normal, don't worry. You guys sound great, you're fine. Wonderful. I've given you PDFs, I believe, with all of the poetry in it. So next week we will read The Seafarer together. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.